morning. Thank you for worshiping with us again today. Sad as it may sound, we're coming to the end, or we're at the end of our spring cleaning series. And so I want to just do a quick recap before we tie out our series today. When we first started this series a couple of weeks ago, the idea was just like we take time in the spring to kind of go through and get our house in order, we thought this would be a time where we could take some time and not just get our physical houses in order, but to get our spiritual houses in order also. So our very first week, our pre-cleaning week, what we talked about doing was having a heart check. We went through and we wanted to make sure, before we started this spring cleaning, we wanted to make sure that we were cleaning in the areas of our lives that God wanted us to clean. And so we spent an entire week connecting our heart with God's heart so that we would be prepared to do the things that he wanted us to do. Our official first week when we kicked off this series, what we worked on was this idea of changing our negative thoughts and our negative comments. And I don't know about you guys, but I do know about me. I found that it was so easy to see the negative, or to see the glass half empty versus the glass being half full. And then continuing to just talk about that all the time. And so the very first week, God just pointed out in my life how negative I had become around things, and how if we're constantly allowing God to move in our lives, he changes our whole philosophy about how we see life. And we do learn to see the glass half full versus focusing on the glass being half empty. So that was week number one. Week number one, we were looking at fasting from negative thoughts and negative comments. We moved from there into week number two. And week number two, we prayed and we fasted around this idea of God bringing healing into our families. And it didn't matter how our families needed to be healed. We wanted God to just come in and do this miraculous change with everybody in our families. And so what we chose to fast from for that week was our sweets and treats. We put those on the altar, asking God to do something in our family lives. And I don't know about you, but I do know about me, man. My family, I could see the changes starting to slowly happen in their lives. Week number three, we talked about receiving and extending forgiveness. Now, this was a hard week for some of us because we learned that we can't extend forgiveness to somebody else until we receive forgiveness from God. And as we receive forgiveness from God, it opened the door and it taught us how to model for other people and how to forgive them. That week, we turned off our televisions and we drew closer to God so that we could feel God's presence, removing the guilt and the condemnation that we had felt from the mistakes that we had made, not just yesterday, but yesteryear. And then in turn, as we felt forgiveness and we felt this new freedom and something lifted off of our shoulders, we were able to turn around and extend forgiveness to those people that had hurt us, those people that had wronged us. We learned how to let them out of their sacred cages and extend forgiveness to them. And as we extended forgiveness to them, we found out that a burden was actually lifted off of us as we forgave them. We've come to the end of this series, and last week we decided that we would fast from social media. We told all of our friends at the beginning of the week, hey, you're not going to see me on social media because I'm fasting this week, so that God would reveal to me and give me an understanding of what his purpose for my life is. We discovered last week that every living human being was born because God wanted them to be born, and each one of us were born because God had a purpose for our lives. And so we decided to walk away from social media, and God has been working with us all week long, telling us why we were created and challenging us with a charge to move forward and live a purpose-driven life. And so here we are. We're at the end of this series, our spring cleaning series. And I want to talk today around the subject of choosing to make a difference. Choosing to make a difference. It's amazing. If your life is like my life, God spoke to you this week and God reminded me that he has called not just me, but each and every one of us to make a difference with the gifts and the skills that he has given to us. That's why we're here. He's provided each one of us with unique gifts and abilities, and he's prepared us with talents that we need to make a difference in the way that other people need to have us make a difference. He's provided us with opportunities to make those differences. So, what that shares with me is that each one of us have all of the skills and the abilities that we need to change other people's lives. I want to have you look at a text with me this morning. We're going to study and spend some time over in John chapter 6. And we're going to look at verses 1 through 4 in the beginning. Let me read it to you this morning. It says, after this, Jesus went across the lake of Galilee. Many people followed him because they saw the miracles that he did healing the sick. Jesus went up on a hillside and he sat down with his followers, and it was almost time for the Jewish Passover feast. When Jesus looked up and he saw a large crowd coming towards him, he said to Philip, "Where can we go and buy enough bread to feed all these people?" Jesus asked Philip this question to test him because Jesus already knew what he was planning to do. Verse number 7 said, Philip answered and said, "Someone would have to work almost an entire year to buy enough bread to feed each one of these, and everyone would only get a small piece if that happened." Think about it. Jesus is on the hillside. He's there teaching, and this huge multitude of people come. You know this story. And as they show up, Jesus looks out, and one translation says that he has compassion on them. He calls Philip and says, "Hey, Philip, come here. I got a question. How can we go and buy bread for each one of these individuals? How can we go and get a sack lunch for them and feed them? They've been here all day. It's crowded, it's hot. We need to do something for these people." Philip is bewildered. He says, "Do you realize how many people are sitting out here? Man, you would have to have a whole year's salary in order to feed all these people. And even with that, you're going to get a small piece." It's always interesting that God never asks us to do anything without already having made a way for that to be accomplished. If God is asking you to do something today, listen to me. If God is asking you to do something, he has already prepared you to make it happen and for you to be successful. You know, sometimes God will ask us to do what we call challenging things. And we think to ourselves, "I can never do that. I don't have the ability to do that. I don't have the skills to do that." It's interesting because in the text, it says that Jesus already knew what he was going to do before he even asked them. In other words, before God brings the challenge to you, before God asks you to do what he's asking you to do, even though it looks difficult to you and it looks difficult to me, the Bible reminds us that God has already equipped us to be successful with the task that he's asking us to do. It's interesting, Philip is running around trying to figure out how in the world he's going to get food to feed all of these people. And before God even asked him, there's already been a plan put together in place. Hey, stay with me this morning. Before leaving home, there's this little boy whose mother has already prepared a small sack lunch for him. She doesn't know what he's going to do that day as he leaves home and as he goes out to hang out and play and do some type of adventure. But as a good mother, she wants to make sure that her son is taken care of. And so she gets up early that morning before he does. And she starts to put together this lunch for him. So no matter where his journey takes him for that day, he doesn't have to come back home at lunchtime. He can continue on whatever he's doing and wherever he's playing, and she prepares a lunch for him. Neither one of them, neither the mom nor the boy, have any idea of the significance of what's being done in their life. But God is already making a way before the problem even shows up. Oh, get this. Even before the crowd shows up with Jesus, the lunch is already prepared by the mom and already given to the little boy. Think about that. Before the problem shows up, the answer is already in place. God provides opportunities for us to make a difference even before we know that the opportunity is showing up. Think about it in your life. God has set up special situations for you and special situations for people like me to do ministry. And so he has people come across our paths every day that need what we already have. We don't have to try to figure it out. He's already equipped us with the skills and with the tools to be able to address and meet somebody else's need and to change their life. And we don't even know it. That's a sobering thought, isn't it? As you're sitting back and you're watching this today, God has already equipped you with skills and with tools and with abilities to be able to change somebody else's life. And God is going to bring somebody across your path today that needs what you already have. You know, I hear people all the time telling me, you know what, I would do it, but I don't have any skills. I have absolutely nothing. And I am reminded that everybody that God allows to be born is done so because he equips them with a tool to be able to touch somebody else's life. Hear me. There are people that only you can touch their lives and nobody else can. God has specifically wired you in a certain way that only you can address the need that somebody else has. I can't do it. Somebody else can't do it. God has specifically wired you a certain way to be able to reach certain people that won't be reached if you don't go. Stay with me this morning. You see, the people have been there all day. The boy is one of the people somehow or another. We don't know how he got connected with this crowd. But as this huge crowd is coming past, he just attaches himself to that crowd. He sees the electricity. He feels the excitement that's going on there. And he, just like all little boys, is curious and says, hey, let me follow this group to see what's going to happen. Is it coincidence? Or is it the plan of God? You see, it's never enough for us just to come to church and be filled without stepping out and doing something for somebody else. One translation reminds us that there are over 5,000 people that are there that day. And yet somehow or another, this little boy is the only one in the crowd that can make a difference in other people's lives. Making a difference, hear this, is always a choice that we get a chance to make. I mean, think about it. God can challenge us and God can call us to do certain things, but we got to choose to do it. It's not enough for God to just extend the invitation or God to send people across your path. You got to choose and I got to choose that we're going to answer that call and step up and do what we can do. Someone has said, I can't do everything, but I can do something. Even though God calls us to make a difference and equips us to make that difference, It is always our choice of whether we're going to do it or whether we're not going to do it. I've noticed in my own life that God will never force me to do anything. He'll never force me to make a choice. I get a chance to choose. God provides an opportunity for me, but I got to step into that opportunity. I've got to make a choice to do what God asked me to do. The ironic thing is that we're not robots. We get to pick and choose. We can hear God speaking to us, and we can choose to follow through with that, or we can choose to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And I need to be honest with you today. Man, there have been countless numbers of times that God has challenged me and charged me to do things, and I have looked God in the face and simply said, I ain't going to do that. You know why you're laughing? Because you've done the exact same thing. Yeah. We've heard God's voice, man. We've heard God speak to us, and we know that it's God speaking to us. And we make an executive decision. The executive decision is, yeah, God, I hear you. That sounds real good. But no, I'm not going to do that. God says, hey, forgive that person. Well, yeah, God, I know that sounds good, and I know you've forgiven me, but I choose not to forgive them. You ever had this happen to you? You've been going along minding your own business, and somebody walks up to you and they says, hey, have you got $1? Could you give me $1? And you hear that little voice in the back of your head, that still small voice that says, hey, give them your $1. And you got a choice to make. If you're like me, we begin to kind of rationalize and say, God, I don't know what they're going to do with this $1. They may take this $1 and go buy drugs, or they may go buy alcohol with it. And so, you know what? I'm going to hold on to my $1. And God says, give them the $1. And we argue back and forth with God. Well, I know you don't, but I know I do. We argue back and forth with God. And then finally we make the choice to keep our $1 in our pocket and we move on. It was a unique opportunity for us to follow God's challenge and make a difference in somebody else's life. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, I'm making a difference in somebody else's life, but what about my life? Hey, did you know that when you answer God's challenge and you follow through and you make a difference in that person's life, what you don't realize, because I didn't realize it for a long time, and that is I'm actually making a difference in my life also. John chapter 6, verses 8 through 9. Another one of the disciples, one of the followers, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, we found this boy with 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 little fish, but that's still not enough to feed all of these people. Hey, get the scene. Somehow or another, they've taken on this task to figure out how they could find enough food to feed all of these people. There's no DoorDash, there's no Grubhub, there's none of those delivery places that will just bring out food for 5,000 people. So they start searching through the audience. Hey, you got any food? You got any food? Any peanuts? You got any food? No. Got any food? No. Got any food? No. Got any food? No. Got any food? I just have this small lunch that my mom made for me, and that's it. Hey, you, come with us. And so they grab this little boy, and they bring him to Jesus. Hey, what must that be like for the kid? He's sitting there minding his own business. It's almost lunchtime. And so he's thinking about, wow, I got my lunch. If I would have been like that, or if he would have been me, I'd have been sitting thinking, you didn't bring any lunch? Your mama didn't make lunch for you? Wow, I'm sure glad my mom made lunch for me. And he's thinking about having his lunch when all of a sudden these big guys come to him and say, you got food? Excuse me. You have food? Hey, come with us. The teacher wants to talk to you. The boy has to make a decision. They're asking him for his lunch. Think about this. He has a choice. He can sit back and start rationalizing like you and I do and say, no, my mom made this lunch for me, and my mom told me to make sure I eat my lunch, and when I get home, she's going to ask me about the lunch, and if I give it to you, I'll be in trouble when I get home. Man, when I was a kid, before they had like free lunches in school, yeah, way back in the old days, right? My mom would make lunch for us when we went to school. And she would always tell us, because she knew how we were, because, you know, little children do that lunch swap, where they'll trade stuff. They'll trade their lunch for candy, or they'll trade their lunch for something else. And so she would always tell me before I left home, you eat this lunch. Don't trade it to anybody. Your mom do the same thing? So imagine you're that little boy, and they're asking you for your lunch. You got to make a choice. What do you do? Making a difference always costs us something. You know, we always want somebody else to make a difference. We always want somebody else to give or somebody to invest, because we don't want to have to sacrifice, or we don't want to have to give up anything, or we don't want to pay the cost to make a difference for somebody else. We don't want to give up our time to mentor somebody else's kid. We don't want to give up our money to kind of help somebody else do something. But if you're going to change the world, and if you're going to make a difference, it's always going to cost you something. So the boy makes an executive decision. He decides to surrender his lunch to Jesus. Now you need to get this, because we've read this story for years, so we already know the outcome. But imagine if you're this little boy and you have to walk over and you give away the only thing that you have. You give away all of your lunch. He doesn't take a piece of bread and one of the small fish and put it in his pocket and say, I'll save this for me. He surrenders everything, his entire lunch. He gives it to Jesus. Doesn't know what he's going to say to his mom when he gets home, and his mom asks him, how was your lunch? He has no idea. He doesn't even think about that. He just walks over and hands what's most important to him at that moment. He walks over and hands that to God. Is it any wonder that the scriptures remind us that unless we become like little children, we can never see the kingdom of God? Gives up his lunch, and he has no assurance that it will make a difference. He has no assurance that he's even going to get lunch. This guy could take his lunch and sit down and just eat it. Oh, well, I got to tell you this story, okay? I was traveling through the airport in Montreal, Canada one day. And I don't know what I was doing. I really wasn't thinking. And when I got into the airport, I was still on the Canadian side. And so I stopped and had lunch at this little spot that I thought looked really nice. And I'm still in the airport. I get my lunch and I get it to go. And as I'm traveling through in the airport, you've got to pass through customs from the Canadian side to get to the American side. Still in the same airport, you're just in a different part of the airport. And I've got my lunch there, and it's in like a little plastic container about as big as this iPad. And the custom agent is sitting there on this little stool, just kind of watching people as they come through. And then you fill out this little form, and it says, do you have anything to declare? You bringing any food? And I say, no, I'm thinking about vegetables from a farm. I'm not even thinking about cooked food because it's been cooked in the airport. And I've got my little lunch there, and I'm walking through, and the custom agent is sitting right there on a little chair. And when I come past, he says, excuse me. I say, yes, sir. He says, what do you have there? So I got my lunch, man. I just finished the training and I got a short time before my plane comes and I'm not going to be able to eat. And I got a long trip home. And he says, okay, tell me what you got for lunch. And I open up my plastic container. And he looks on the inside, my little styrofoam container, he looks on the inside. He says, that looks very good. And I'm like, it is. The last time I flew through here, I stopped here, man, the food was just fantastic. He says, well, I don't doubt that it's fantastic, but I only had one problem. I said, well, what's the problem? He says, I can't allow you to transport food from one country to the next country, and I don't get it because it's just in the airport. He says, you're bringing food and you're transporting it from the Canadian side and you're going to the American side, and you can't bring produce or food over to the other side. And I'm thinking produce is oranges or apples. Stop laughing. You've done crazy stuff too. He says, now what I can do is that if the lunch is really just that fantastic and you would like to keep it, then you can give us a $400 fee. And then I can waive it and you can take your lunch, man, and you can just go right on. And I'm thinking, it's a great lunch, but it's not a $400 lunch. I said, well, I don't have $400. He says, well, the only other thing I could have you do was you could just drop that lunch in this little container right here. And he had this real small trash can, maybe about that tall, about that wide at the top. The container won't even fit down into the trash can. I literally have to just kind of sit it right on top of the trash can. It won't even go in. And so I got to think about it. $400 or my lunch? $400 or my lunch? Hey, that's a no-brainer. Take my lunch, sit it on top of the little container. I thank the person for not sending me to jail, and I scurry on to the American side of the airport to catch my plane and to come home. Something tells me as I'm walking through towards the American side to just kind of turn around and take a glance back one more time, like Lot's wife. And I look back and my plastic styrofoam container that had my lunch in it that wouldn't fit down into the trash isn't sitting there anymore. Now, I could be wrong, and I don't want to be judgmental or make a judgment call, but I still think to this day that guy took my lunch and he ate it. Stop laughing, it's not that funny. Well, it is now, but it wasn't then. The boy gives up his lunch with no assurance that he's going to have lunch that day. He makes this decision. He chooses to accept the challenge that Jesus gives to him. He trusts God to work things out even though he can't see how it's going to work out. You see, sometimes we don't make a difference in other people's lives because we really don't trust God enough to say God will work this thing out. All we've got to do is step forward and just simply say yes and allow God to work out the rest of it. You can never be in the service of God. You can never make a difference in somebody else's life until we really truly learn to trust what God is asking us to do and that God will work this out. The boy recognizes that there's a need in other people's lives, and that need outweighs his own personal needs. See, sometimes we don't do for others because we're wondering what we're going to lose in our own lives if we give up something that's precious to us for somebody else.